Regret has a particular kind of quiet that nothing else replicates. It doesn't announce itself in the moment. It waits. It waits until the job is gone, until the season has passed, until you're sitting alone with your thoughts, asking, "Why didn't I see this coming?" And here's the uncomfortable truth many believers don't want to admit. Most career regret isn't the result of bad luck. It's the result of decisions made in a hurry, decisions made out of fear, or decisions made while quietly ignoring the small warning already whispering inside. Today we're walking through 6 career decisions that Christians consistently regret, not because God didn't warn them, but because the warning came so quietly it was easy to override. Proverbs 19:2 tells us that zeal without knowledge is not good, and whoever acts hastily makes mistakes. That verse should be tattooed on the inside of every resignation letter and every job offer acceptance email. Haste is rarely the friend of wisdom. Let's walk through the 6 decisions that so many believers look back on and wish, more than anything, they had slowed down long enough to reconsider. Number 1. Taking a job for the salary while ignoring the toll it takes on your peace. There's a particular kind of regret that comes with a very comfortable paycheck attached to it. You said yes because the number was too good to say no to. You told yourself you'd figure out the rest later. The long hours, the toxic culture, the compromise of values you swore you'd never make. But later always arrives, and by then the golden handcuffs have already tightened. Matthew 6:24 reminds us that no one can serve 2 masters, and warns specifically against letting money become the thing we ultimately serve. This doesn't mean money is evil, or that a good salary is something to avoid. It means money was never meant to be the deciding factor when your peace, your family, or your integrity hang in the balance. Think of the rich young ruler in Luke 18, a man who walked away from Jesus, not because he was told to do something impossible, but because the cost of following was measured against what he already had, and comfort won. Years later, believers who made the same trade often describe the exact same regret, not that the money was bad, but that they let it silence a warning they should have listened to. Number 2. Staying silent when God nudged you to leave, out of fear of instability. This regret sounds different than the first one. It's not, "I chased money." It's, "I knew, and I stayed anyway." Maybe you sensed the shift months, even years earlier. A restlessness, a door quietly opening elsewhere. But the fear of starting over, the fear of financial uncertainty, the fear of disappointing people who expected you to stay, kept your feet planted exactly where they were. Isaiah 30:21 promises that whether we turn to the right or the left, we will hear a voice behind us saying, "This is the way, walk in it." That voice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's a persistent unease you talk yourself out of for years. Abraham was called to leave everything familiar, his country, his people, his father's household, into uncertainty, trusting only the voice that called him. Believers who ignore that same kind of nudge often describe the regret not as failure, but as delay, wondering how different things might have looked if they had obeyed the first time they heard it instead of the 5th. Number 3. Choosing a career path to please parents or meet others' expectations instead of seeking God's direction. This one runs deep because it usually starts with love, not rebellion. You wanted to make your parents proud. You wanted to meet the expectations of a family, a culture, a community that had a very specific picture of what success should look like. So you chose the path they approved of, even when your own spirit was whispering something else entirely. Galatians 1:10 asks a piercing question, whether we are seeking the approval of people or of God, reminding us that if we are still trying to please people, we are not truly serving Christ. This isn't a call to dishonor parents or reject wise counsel. It's a warning against building an entire career on approval rather than calling. Believers who followed this path often describe waking up decades later, successful by every external measure, yet strangely empty, having spent their life fulfilling someone else's vision instead of the one whispered specifically to them. Number 4. ignoring repeated closed doors and forcing your way through anyway. Sometimes we mistake persistence for faith. We push and push against a door that keeps closing, convincing ourselves that enough effort will eventually force it open, when really, the closed door was the answer all along. Proverbs 16:3 tells us to commit our plans to the Lord, and He will establish them, which implies that some plans, no matter how hard we push, were never His to establish in the first place. King Saul offered an unauthorized sacrifice in 1 Samuel 13, unwilling to wait for Samuel as instructed, forcing his way forward instead of trusting the timing he'd been given. That single act of impatience cost him his kingdom. Believers who force their way through repeated closed doors often look back and realize the resistance wasn't an obstacle to overcome, it was information they were too determined to receive. Number 5. Neglecting to steward your gifts because the safe path felt more responsible. There's a quiet tragedy in choosing safety over stewardship. You had a gift, a calling, a pull toward something specific, but the safe, sensible, practical option felt more responsible, more mature, more like what a good provider should choose. So the gift sat unused, year after year, buried under the justification of responsibility. Matthew 25:14-30 tells the parable of the talents, where the servant who buried his 1 talent out of fear was rebuked, not because he lost money, but because he refused to steward what he'd been given at all. That parable exists precisely because burying a gift out of caution is still a choice, and it's a choice Scripture takes seriously. Believers who spend decades in safe careers while their actual gifting sits dormant often describe the regret not as financial, but as a haunting sense of what if, wondering what might have grown if the gift had been stewarded instead of protected. Number 6. Making a major career move without ever bringing it before God in prayer. This final regret is perhaps the most common and the most avoidable. Not a wrong decision made in defiance, but a decision made in a hurry, skipping the step of actually asking God first. Caught up in urgency or excitement, you moved forward on instinct, on opportunity, on what looked good on paper, without ever slowing down to genuinely seek His direction. Proverbs 3:5-6 instructs us to trust God with our whole heart, rather than leaning on our own understanding, submitting to Him in all our ways so He can straighten our paths. That verse assumes a posture of asking first, not asking after the fact, when things have already gone wrong. Believers who skip this step often don't regret the decision itself as much as they regret the shortcut, the choice to move fast instead of moving prayerfully, only realizing in hindsight how much clarity they missed by rushing past the one conversation that mattered most. Here's what ties all 6 of these regrets together. None of them are really about bad luck, and none of them are unforgivable mistakes that define a person forever. They're about pace. Almost every regret on this list traces back to moving faster than wisdom, faster than prayer, faster than the quiet warning that was already present before the decision was ever made. Ecclesiastes 5:2 reminds us not to be quick with our mouths or hasty in our hearts to utter anything before God, because He is in heaven and we are on earth, and our words should be few. That same principle applies to major decisions. Slowness isn't weakness. Slowness is often obedience, wearing a patient disguise. If you're standing at a crossroads right now, facing a decision about your career, your calling, or your next step, let this be the moment you choose differently than the 6 patterns we just walked through. Don't chase the salary at the expense of your peace. Don't silence the nudge out of fear. Don't build your path around someone else's approval. Don't force open what God has clearly closed. Don't bury the gift for the sake of safety. And above everything else, don't move until you've actually brought it to Him first. James 4:14-15 reminds us that we don't even know what tomorrow holds, and instead of assuming our own plans, we should say, if it is the Lord's will, we will do this or that. That posture alone prevents most of the regret we just talked about, because it puts the decision back where it always belonged. You still have time to choose differently than the story we just walked through. The door hasn't closed on you yet. If this word met you exactly where you are, drop "I choose to slow down" in the comments and subscribe so the next message reaches you before the decision does.